Hi, Stephen from Owner Disown. Many compare the Razer's 15 gaming laptop to Apple's MacBook because the aluminum unibody construction is seamless and it is solid. Its elegant design would befit a gamer and a business professional alike. It is free from the usual gaming stickers and the big grills one associates with a gaming laptop. Now, compared to an Alienware 13 laptop, it is nearly the same size, which is not bad for a 15-inch. In the PC space, its closest rivals are cheaper. The Aero 15W and 15X, also with an aluminum body, are slightly larger, but they do come with an extra M.2 SSD slot and an SD card reader. And the MSI GS65 Stealth is also cheaper. It's actually lighter, but has an inverted motherboard, making upgrades much harder. Now, until the Asus Zephyrus S arrives, the Razer 15 is going to be the thinnest gaming laptop. The problem with thin laptops though is cooling, and Razer has adopted a vapor chamber cooling system. But from the videos I have seen, the CPU and the GPU do average in the 90s, using the balance mode and auto fan during gaming. Now, my unit has been repasted with liquid metal by HID Evolution. If anything is going to help this coolest laptop, that will. Now, to get inside, you remove 10 Torx screws. And you remove the back cover, which is nice and stiff. You do get an 80 watt-hour battery, which is good for 7 hours 12 minutes of YouTube streaming at 25% brightness. Now, HID Evolution did put a thermal pad on my SSD, which I was very pleased to see. Now, there are two fans, and inside this metal shroud we have the vapor chamber cooling, the i7-8750H CPU and the Max-Q GTX 1070. Now, it does look easy to take apart and work on, but be careful of this ribbon here. The Wi-Fi card is Intel 9260, and you have 2 RAM slots which max out at 32 gigabytes. Now, my unit has 2 sticks of 8 gigs. Using Razer's Synapse software, you can choose gaming or balance mode. Gaming increases the GPU core clock by 100 MHz, as well as increasing the power to the CPU from 35 watts in balance mode to 45 watts. You can use MSI Afterburner to further increase the boost on the GTX 1070, but it only gave an extra 2 FPS, so I did not include this in my tests. For fan control, you can select either auto or manual. Now, unfortunately, you can't take the fans all the way down to 0 or create your own fan curve to have a totally silent system. But to be fair, the fans aren't all that loud. At idle streaming video, the fans were quiet 23 decibels. And with the auto fan under full load, we get 38 decibels. And with the fan at max 5000 RPM, we get 44 decibels. Now, I have heard a louder boost fan than this, but this will still disturb people around you. Now, my objective with this liquid metal system was twofold. The first was to achieve temperatures below 90 degrees at a regular room temperature of about 70 degrees Fahrenheit, using the auto fan. And the second was to keep temperatures below 90 degrees with a much higher ambient temperature. Now, underneath there are 2 fan grills, and you can actually see the keyboard lighting through them. Cool air is brought in from underneath and is pushed through the system. You can actually see these cool spots on this infrared image. This keeps your left hand nice and cool when gaming. There are also 2 large feet, the rear one being thicker than the front one, which does allow more air underneath. With balance mode and auto fan, it does get hot near the hinge where heat is exhausted. Underneath, it also gets very hot, hitting 53 degrees Celsius. Now, cranking up the fan speed does help cool this, but 50 degrees is still pretty hot. Now, that being said, the MSI 65 or GS65 and the Aero 15W both get hotter. Now, in terms of power pull from the wall, balance mode pulls about 157 watts and the gaming mode pulls 191 watts. Since the laptop has the lower powered Max-Q version of the GTX 1070, its 230 watt power supply is much smaller than the typical 280 watt one you get, adding to its portability. I would make sure to keep it either on the floor though or on the perhaps a table when gaming, as it does get quite hot at 51 degrees Celsius. Razer uses a proprietary power connector that can be inserted both ways. It is angled to help keep the cable away from the ports when it's plugged behind the laptop, but if the power is behind you, it will block the left-hand ports. So on the left-hand side, you have the power port, you have 2 USB 3.1 ports and a combo headphone microphone jack. On the right hand side there is the Kensington lock, mini DisplayPort 1.4, HDMI 2.0, a third USB 3.1 port and a Thunderbolt 3 port. The base model comes with a 1080p 60Hz panel, but mine has the 144Hz panel by LG. And at 329 nits it is quite bright and copes with the glare quite well. I like how the hinge is nice and stiff and the screen is very rigid. At 4.9mm its bezels are very thin and there is a rubber strip along the edge to protect it when it gets closed. It is nice to see the webcam still up top. So a 720p webcam, it's okay. At least it's at the top of the panel this time. So anyway, this is what it looks and sounds like. Colours are nice and crisp with a 97% of sRGB and 72% Adobe RGB, so it is fine for content creators and viewing angles are very good. Unfortunately, I do have one dead pixel, but it is only noticeable in certain conditions. My screen also does exhibit some backlight bleed at the bottom. In my ghosting test, it performed on par with my 120Hz Sager, so that is very good. And if you can afford it, I would definitely go for the faster 144Hz display over the 60Hz. The back panel has the green glowing Razer emblem, which actually can be turned off or set to breathe using the Razer Synapse software. It has quite large speakers at the sides that fire upwards, and at 68 decibels, they are okay. The power button is actually located above the right speaker, but unfortunately it does not double as a fingerprint reader, which for such an expensive laptop is quite disappointing. The keyboard, as you would expect for such a thin chassis, doesn't have the largest distance of travel, but I gamed on it just fine. Some people might not like that the question mark has been moved, but for me my biggest complaint is that Razer still doesn't have secondary function keys that are backlit. But since each key is RGB backlit, you can use the Chroma software to highlight certain keys you use a lot and create various lighting patterns. At max brightness, the key lighting is very bright, and by default pressing the FN key highlights the F row of keys and the arrow keys. There are actually 14 levels of brightness, which to be honest is crazy, and what makes it worse on this setup anyhow, you can only see the change via the lit F row of keys. Now using the software you can change the F keys to be regular FN keys or multimedia keys, which allows you to use them with a single key press, for example to change the volume. And it also allows you to see all the keys dim as you decrease the brightness. You can also create macros, which is useful for creating shortcuts for frequently used programs. You can also link games to this lighting software. For example, in Overwatch, it automatically highlights the keys that are used the most. I've already mentioned the balanced and gaming modes, so I tested those, but I also used throttle stop to set the multipliers to 35 and undervolt by 125 millivolts. Now the idea behind this was to allow use of the 45 watt gaming profile and use the auto fan to keep temperatures low and quiet. Now take a look at my Adobe Premiere Pro. Using the balance profile in orange, the CPU averages 34 watts and 2867 megahertz. The max temp using the auto fan of 75 degrees is good, but unfortunately performance is below the MSI GS65, but ahead of the Aero 15W. Applying the gaming profile in green brings performance to where it should be. 45 watts, 3136 megahertz on average, and a max CPU temperature of 82 degrees. Now applying my throttle stop setting in yellow, the CPU now averages 3460 megahertz, shaves off 5 degrees and does the render 10% quicker, making it even quicker than the GS65. In Cinebench, we see a similar trend, although the throttle stop tweak only serves to lower the temperatures here. This is because in Cinebench it is only a short test. Testing something longer, such as my handbrake encode, really exposes the differences in performance. Using the balance profile, the time taken of nearly 42 minutes is actually the same as a quad-core CPU. Look at the average clock rate of only 2262 megahertz. The temperature of 63 degrees is fine, so Razer just limits performance in balance mode, but to a level way below to what it should be. Heck, the Aero 15W, which is 50% cheaper, does it 25% quicker. Applying a gaming mode in green does help, and even with the auto fan, the CPU maxes at 77 degrees, which is great. Unfortunately, it is still 10% behind the cheaper Aero 15W. It's not until you apply the throttle stop settings that we see performance numbers where they should be. The Corona benchmark uses the CPU to render a scene. It's similar to Cinebench but longer and, to be honest, more representative of a real workload. Using balance mode, we get a time of 3 minutes 40 seconds and an average clock speed of 2930 MHz and a peak temperature of 74 degrees. Gaming profile reduces the time to 3 minutes 16 seconds and the average CPU clock speed increases to about 3270 MHz. The max temperature is 76 degrees. And this is with the auto fan, and this is still good. Now with my throttle stops profile, we get a further reduction in time taken and a higher average CPU frequency. To put performance into perspective, a quad-core i7-7700HQ takes over 2 minutes longer. So if this is the type of workload you do a lot of, a step up to the new 6-core CPUs is a must. I really recommend just using the balance profile for basic tasks and the gaming profile for anything intensive, preferably with my throttle stop settings to optimize performance and keep temperatures in check. Octane Bench uses just the CUDA cores of the GPU to do a series of ray trace renders. The 1070 Max-Q scores 111.64 points, which is not far behind the more powerful GTX 1080 and much better than the GTX 1060. I use Traktor to test its ability to handle real-time audio, and the Razer 15 handles it with ease. The Razer 15 also multitasks pretty well, doing repeated runs of Cinebench and the Heaven benchmark continuously, and we get about 841 points. That's pretty good. Now, playing games on it was great. I actually took it away with me on vacation and put several hours of gaming onto it. So, Battlefield 1 in balance mode, the GPU runs at about 79 degrees and the CPU in the mid 80s, and the frame rate anywhere from 66 to 96. This is DX12 Ultra settings. Now note that the CPU hovers around the 2600 MHz mark. So switching to the gaming mode with the max fan, the CPU clock rate increases to 3500 MHz and results in a higher CPU temperature, despite the higher fan speed. Since the GPU is overclocked, that is about 2 degrees warmer too. Now the frame rate generally playing in the mid 70s. Using gaming mode and my tweak with the auto fan, the CPU maintains its higher clock rate with a 5-degree cooler temperature, despite a slower fan. Now that isn't bad. The GPU is also cooler too, and the frame rate is a little bit higher. The point to take away from this though is that you get the best performance using a lower fan speed with less noise and very good temperatures. Sure, balance mode with liquid metal does help with the over the stock paste, but my throttle stop settings should be used regardless of paste. Playing Fortnite at epic settings using the balanced profile sees the CPU clock at 3200 MHz and the temperature in the mid 80s. The GPU is at about 80 degrees. The frame rate is usually over 100, whilst a GTX 1060 averages in the 80s, so the 144 Hz screen is great for this setup. Using the gaming profile and the max fan, the CPU boosts up to 3800 MHz and remains in the low 80s, with the GPU being 5 degrees cooler in the mid 70s. Using auto fan and my throttle stop settings, the CPU and GPU are cooler than using the balanced profile, both in the 70s. Performance is about the same. PUBG with balance mode and auto fan sees the GPU at about 80 degrees and the CPU at 85 degrees, with frame rates in the high 80s with ultra settings. The CPU boosts up to about 3000 MHz. Switching to the gaming and max fan, the CPU boost goes up to 3500 MHz, but so does its temperature, touching 90 degrees. Now applying my tweak and auto fan, the temperatures are perhaps slightly lower, again with less noise. I would say that is a nice gain. Okay, so this footage was taken with room temperatures of about 72 degrees Fahrenheit. What happens if you game in warmer climates? So what I did, I went outside and I played Far Cry 5 where it was about 82 degrees Fahrenheit. In balance mode with auto fan, the GPU was at about 81 degrees and the CPU at 89 degrees. Not bad at all. So switching to gaming mode with the max fan, we see the CPU rise up to about 98 degrees Celsius. And applying my tweak, still with the max fan gaming mode, the temperature drops down to 88 degrees on the CPU, and in fact you can probably get away with just using the auto fan. Not bad at all. This slide sums up CPU performance whilst gaming. There's a lot of data here, so you may want to pause it. In blue we have a balance mode with auto fan. Then in orange, the balance mode with the max fan. Generally, the CPU would average 25 watts in this mode with an average of 78 degrees regardless of fan speed. The max temperature does reduce from 90 to 85 degrees using the max fan though. The average clock rate on balance mode was 3000 MHz and the average frame rate was at 1080p. Max settings was about 80 with a minimum of 59 FPS. Switching to the gaming mode, we have the max fan in grey and with the auto fan tweak in yellow. Now the key thing to take away from this is that the CPU clock rate goes up slightly and the temperature is down by 3 to 4 degrees, all with less fan noise. Also, if you compare the yellow bars to the balanced stroke max fan orange bar, you will see that the average CPU temperature is the same and the max temperature is only 3 degrees more. Is the GTX 1070 Max-Q better value than the GTX 1060? Minimums are in blue, averages in orange and gaming mode in green. Over the GTX 1060 we see a nice 35% improvement, and when you consider the GTX 1070 model is 18% more expensive than the 1061 with the same screen, then that's not bad. Far Cry 5 we see a good performance gain over the GTX 1060 models, and when we apply the gaming mode, anywhere from 18 to 30%. And finally in PUBG we see about a 32% improvement over the 1060. So is the 1070 model worth it over the 1061? Well, if you get the stock configuration with the same 144Hz screen, then it's a definite yes. You get a greater percentage improvement in gaming performance than the increased percentage in price. If you go with a 60Hz panel, value is about the same, as is the case if you pay for extra for the liquid metal, although I do estimate you will get about a 10-degree reduction in temperature going the liquid metal route. Now you must be aware though, and be careful, liquid metal will need replacing more often than regular paste, but at least HID Evolution does give a lifetime technical warranty. Now the value does change when you compare the Razer over its cheaper competition. Now for some this is going to be a small price to pay, because you do get a fantastic build quality, but with Razer's questionable support, that premium may be too much for some. Now I have tried the MSI GS65 and the Aero 15W, and I must say I really do like the Razer 15. There is something about it that actually does draw me to it. Now I would like to thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe. See you next time. Bye.